Bien. Alejandro.
Okay, Alejandro, could you please turn on your camera?
Ya.
Okay.
Vale, súper.
Okay, so
Ahora a los asistentes vamos a comenzar con
we're going to begin with the presentation,
con la introducción.
and I'm going to give you an introduction.
Compartir
I'm going to share.
aquí. Ya. Ahí me confirman.
So you can confirm whether you can see.
¿Me confirman si se ve la pantalla?
Can you see my screen?
¿Se ve?
Can you see it? Yes, we can.
Primero que todo, muchas gracias a
Okay,
todos
so
los presentes.
first of all, thank you all for being here.
Esta sesión es la
This
última
is the
sesión
last
respecto
session
de esta serie de presentaciones que hemos
on
estado
this
haciendo,
series of
enfocado
presentations we've done,
en el caso del
focused
uso,
on
de certificados digitales de OMS,
the use
esta
of
práctica
digital certificates, the DDCC for PAHO. This is a interoperability across the border initiatives for Latin America and the Caribbean. And in this sense, the conversion of initiatives right now has considered 3 projects which have relatively different objectives. In practice, they do share something, which is the digital certificates, the so-called DDCCs. So we have the LACPASS, which is focused on digital transformation in health areas to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 in Latin America and the Caribbean. And they are working on the DDCC. Then we have the G20 WHO group, which focuses on developing DDCCs and interoperability among conference frameworks. And then we have the PAHO-DDCC project. I am Sonia Espinosa, and I am part of the PAHO-DDCC project to give continuity to BPR and especially certain elements for public good regarding the evolution of certificates in this format, regarding the convergence of this initiative. So having the different participants, you see the large number of countries involved in either one or the 3 initiatives that make up this convergence. So within the project, the LACPASS project, which is the larger scale project with longer term, which uses, it has to do with uses of DDCC, corresponds to the architecture that supports transborder interoperability. And part of that architecture and that conceptual model includes, I'm sorry, we are losing her sound, so it's not possible to hear her. She's completely breaking up. Okay, so, but this has to do with the certificates. And so to review, we have had a series of presentations starting in February. We had introductory level presentations for all of you, starting with explaining standards and the concept of interoperability. And then we had an introduction to HL7 FIRE, which is the framework where we have interoperability. And then we had an IPS presentation, and this is a standard on which digital certificates, the DDCCs, are based. And finally, we had an introduction to documentation and technical framework for PAHO-DDCC. After that, we started to go more in depth in the certificates per se in order to provide certain necessary teachings to be able to understand the use and the elements that make up the way certificates are generated. So there's a relatively simple way in which we can generate the certificates, but it was very important to understand so that those who use the devices would understand and they could better use and more efficiently use the tools that are available. So we worked on learning about the certificate, the data point regarding the data repository, the installation of the HL7 Fire, and provide other knowledge to understand the use case. Then we studied transactions. Last week, we worked on generating the entry message for transactions of records generated, so that today, based on all the other teachings we've provided, we are going to make a demo and an exercise and explain how certificates are generated. So I have Alejandro Medina, an engineer's sons, who will present the exercise of certificate generation exercise. Today, we have 1 hour and 30 minutes, and the presentation will be using the same framework as others. We have reserved a little more time in case it's necessary. We have a discussion regarding this final presentation. And now I give the floor to Alejandro. Over to you, and I will be here monitoring to see if there are questions. Alejandro, do you want us to interrupt you as we go, or do you want questions at the end? He's muted. Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, you can interrupt me and ask as we go, because you know, some points are better than explained as we go at the moment. I'm sharing now my screen. Okay, so here we go. Please let me know if you can see it. All right. Okay. Yes, we can see it. So let us start then. So I am Alejandro Medina. I am technical leader in implementation and I'm in charge of demonstrating you the process in the different stages. So what we're going to see today is something related to the certificate generation. I understand that in prior presentations, people wanted to see the generation exercise. So the day has come, and the purpose of today's session is for you to see the generation process in practice and how the tool is installed, a tool that is available already for you to install it so that you can download it and start using it as part of your resources. So the things we're going to do today, we have introduction, summary of transactions, And then we will have all the necessary elements for the process. For example, an example of certificate generation, obtaining the health a folder, and then an obtention, certificate obtention example, and then we will have also a validation with signature or via signature, and that will be the last example. So as we've seen before, we've shown official WHO documentation for documents for COVID-19, reviewing vaccination status. This is the main focus. There are other initiatives as well. We have analyzed the data set, and there was a session where we solved some doubts that could exist related to the data set, which is so important. Other presentations, we went over transactions, how a system, a notification vaccination system should behave, and alternatives. And we also emphasize the fact that this is not rigid. You don't need to implement it exactly the same way, because each member state will have nuances and their own variations. An important part of this is that the definition asks us to use the HL7 fire standard. We have taught how to teach Happy Fire and how to install Fire. This tool allows us to accelerate certain implementation elements. The alternative is this repository. You could also use other alternatives. And when we made the Fire presentations, there was a free alternative, the payment alternative, our own tools, etc. So we need to respect the connection interfaces to each one of the requests, and some of the ones I will be showing you now. So with all these elements, we can start generating the DDCC certificate, and that's what we will be showing now. The process, let me see, the documentation is all available. Once you have access to the presentation, you will have the links, and there is an implementation guide. We also have a technical guide, and we have a technical summary for those of you who would like to see how this project is defined. So this whole set of elements and part of the prior sessions have been in preparation for you to better understand how to interpret an implementation guide. Oh, I'm sorry here. I pressed the wrong button, so my presentation disappeared. Sorry. I'll be back. Okay, this keyboard is quite sensitive, so I apologize for that. The idea is how you can approach the implementation guide and how you work with it. This applies to anything you want. If you had another project in Fire, or you want to use another implementation guide, the process will be the same, most likely. There will be technical documentation, implementation directions, and the whole process of implementation as shown by the guide. In this case, Fire keeps the same model. We have the menu, the general descriptions, transactions, data sets, and all the Fire artifacts that are needed for the project. Part of the data set, which was the other topic we reviewed here, we have 3 different sets: patient data, certified data, and data related to vaccination. And in addition to this, the definitions are in all documents, beginning with the technical documentation, the implementation guide. And there was also a presentation about all the data set with a more extensive explanation. Okay, so at any rate, you can see the set in the implementation guide. You can see the changes, or you can check whether there is whether you have a doubt regarding the data sets. with respect to the server, the HL7 Fire server allows us to store all the information related to vaccine records, and we can extend it to other solutions. For example, this is the test use case, which is related to the vaccines. But if you were to have other uses, then Fire will be able to support all the search functions and other element as well. The repository in this case has a Happy Fire server, which contains all in one. There are no other, but there would be, but there are other alternatives you could use. So here we can never rule out anything. So there are other alternatives. So how do you install install the tool? We have the repository, and what we have here, this is the DDC transactions mediator. It is a repository, and the code that this repository has is based on a WHO database. It comes from the original project. And with this initiative, we're trying to then provide this service and give new life according to the implementation guide and the transactions that have been defined in all of the documentation. Part of the steps involve the different uses. So let me just show you the installation and how the process goes. One of the prerequisites is to have a pre-installed the Docker engine and also Compose. So having this will facilitate things, because with certain commands, we can do a lot of instructions, and all the instructions are in the file, in the README file. So also this repository or this project can be uploaded with IPS national backend, which is part of the initiative that is promoted by WHO LACPASS. Okay, let me show you the repository. The repository has basic structure. Here's the whole information, and here the set of Docker Compose that you can use. You can modify this project under a context like for vaccines, but you can also reuse it for other contexts other than vaccines. And with the README file, you have certain elements required to be able to do the execution. An important thing is to let me go here to the README. One of the things is to have a private key or a couple of keys. Here we need the private key. If you don't have it, you can generate one. This is one of the requirements. The other one is to have the URL of the Fire server in case you're using an external Fire server. Based on the other presentations based on a Fire server, you can put that here, and this project is going to consider that variable, and will consider the Fire server for this. And there will be transactions to storage and service using this service. So these are the two necessary elements: the private key and the Fire server, and the private key for the folder that you need. Let me show you how it is done in code. Among the options, we have the descriptions, OpenHIP, and you can see whether it fulfills the expectations you have. And so the open one allows us to do similar things to be gateway. We can record certain other services and manage certain user permits and other elements. In case you only want to test the tool and you have other technology to do that process, to manage the AP, you can go without OpenHIM, but the requirements are still the same. We still need the file server and you still need the private key, even if you choose not to use the OpenHIM. So if you need to update the code, if you need to do something with the code, there are certain instructions that allow us to go back and construct certain images and get the service going. So whether we are using OpenHIM or without OpenHIM, this is how you can use this repository. Maybe we will continue to add some elements in the future for this project. These images are available also in Docker.
Un segundo, creo que
So hold on. Okay.
del conjunto de iniciativas.
So we have the set of initiatives.
Utilizar y aquí está la
You can use them, and here is the definition: DDCC, mediator, and service. So let me go back now to the presentation. And let me continue with the process. Now, let me show you. I hope I don't have to get to the point where I have to show code. And please tell me if you can see the screen well. One of the requirements this project had, and Sonia, can you confirm that you can see my screen? Yes, we can. Okay, so one of the requirements was to have your private key for a certain route. And of course, we have to have that in the folder. We have to have the private key
and also to have the route at
the route to
within
the fire server.
I will now try to find that route, which I will be following. One of the elements to set in motion this service has to do with having to have a fire server. I have a fire server, therefore, the same one that Marcelo showed us in the previous session. So I will be taking that same service again, where you can see some of the details corresponding to such service. Here we are. Here we go. Here you have the fire server having its database plus the fire server with another version. This is the service that we will be getting now. If you have the image, you can do this quite rapidly. It takes about 50 seconds to get the entire service. So here we're going to be taking this service and we're going to take a look at it. We'll move the log. We have the instructions also, all the directions to know what to do. And on the other hand, also, I'm going to be placing the line that enables us to have that environmental variable of the fire service, that ambient variable, so that the transaction, which is our generation service, may indeed know what fire server it's going to be using. Once we have all these elements, we can proceed, and you will look at the instructions, which also appear in the beginning, where you may want to take a look at them. Obviously, this service is the one that loads the private key hoping that the fire server will be available. So here it is just waiting for this service to be lifted entirely, the fire server that is. And once it is available, it will effectively tell us that it can conduct fire transactions. Okay, so here we have the entire fire server online. It's going to send a test transaction, which is an arbiter to show that certain service was uplifted. And later on, this generation service would be made available. It will have its private key and the fire server as well. This tells us that the server is now port 43. Okay, wonderful. With this, we have lifted our generation service, and we are now ready to make use of it in this instance. Let me move back to the presentation now. Here we go. Please let me know if you have been following up to this point. Part of the transaction summary, and that is what this generation service will do, is to receive an event. In this case, the event is a vaccination event, and all information relating to that vaccination event. Obviously, all that data is the one that is actually defined in the minimum data set. This transaction media is our generation service, and our fire server would then be the storage and registration service. With all these elements, we can bring a solution to all the transactions defined in the implementation guide. Since the idea here is to be able to follow this step by step, I will be showing you the implementation guide and for you to see where all these definitions can be found. So here we have all the definitions and the transactions for the implementation guide. You see the transaction of this summit event, the storage of the certificate, the registration of the certificate, as well as other operations that have to do with finding and obtaining the certificate. Excellent. So we are now going to receive a vaccination event. We're going to generate a certificate. We will store it. And later on, it will be recorded or registered by using the IT67MHD. And later on, we will be conducting certain operations, a very simple search operation to find all certificates of vaccination events which are related to a certain master identifier for a patient in this case. The first case that we're going to be considering is the case of generation. This is a session where we built a bundle, a questionnaire with a question response. We're going to use that. I have a test case, which we're going to be using. We're going to be sending with the post to the DDCC route, according to our server in this instance. This will be a bundle resource with a questionnaire response. And the idea is that as an exit data, we'll have a DDCC document. In other words, we'll have the beginning and the end of the entire process. And therefore, we will be giving an explanation as to internally, what is it that this transaction is actually doing. As a point of fact, this is the operation that enables us to generate the certificate. So I would very much like to move to the post mark, where we have seen the details of this transaction in various presentations. We'll now carry out with the server. So I will conclude in this way my post application. Can you let me know if you can see this on the screen? Is it clear to you, for you to see? I would like for you to see it relatively well, if possible. The services are running port 4321. When we brought it from DDCC, we'll send it the post method, generating in this manner the certificate. This is the bundle that you generated, or the one that was shared with you in the previous sessions. It's a batch type bundle, the fire kind. And obviously, among its elements, we have a questionnaire response. This questionnaire response includes all the data having to do with the entire set of data. Here you have the name, a date of birth, an identifier for the patient, as well as the gender of the patient, sex, information, as well as information regarding the certificates or the certificate that we will be able to find. Therefore, we now here have all the information in a relatively simple manner. We have obtained it. And with this information, what we do now is to send this service to interpret all this information and thus generate the certificate. As you may acknowledge, this is sort of a black box. It's like a black box where we will be having just an entry and an exit point. I will explain to you, although I will not show you the code directly, but conceptually speaking, what does this operation do? Well, I'm going to send, and this will take an instant to initiate the service. And let us wait for the return of the certificate. It will give us back the certificate. Our Fire server is empty. Therefore, it must generate certain charts and other elements to conduct the processing. We give it a little time, and then it will respond.
Perfecto. En caso de que no nos responda, voy a revisar inmediatamente que nos pueda estar llamando. Sí. Creo que le indiqué mal la URL del servidor Firewall.
I think I may have given a wrong indication. So allow me one more minute.
Sí, creo que yo cometí un error ahí. Voy a levantar nuevamente el servidor Firewall. Creo que cometí un error ahí de configuración. Ya la idea es que obviamente el servidor Fire tiene
So the idea is that the Fire server has a port where it enters, and it enters when it finds the variable. I think I made a mistake when I made the input of the information.
Un segundo. Ya. Voy a verificar que el servidor Fire esté en línea.
Let me make certain that the Fire server is online.
Está levantando todavía. Y nos indica que el servidor, ya, ok, estamos en la...
Tells me that I encountered a problem.
Voy a intentar obtener un documento. Vamos a esperar que falle. Ya no va a existir este documento. Y vamos a enviar el certificado de su generación. Ya. Una vez que arranqué el servidor Fire de nuevo,
Here we have to restart the fire once again. So we have the answer, which is a batch response bundle. Supposing that we have a batch type bundle, we obtain the response or the answer. The answer will include the definition of the certificate itself. What does this certificate represent? It's a container. And what tells us under here, it tells us the type of bundled resource, what type of document it is, as well as all the information contained within this element, which is the information for the certificate. All the information was then transformed HCDID. Once we sent the data of the patient has been transformed into resources with its own referencing. Therefore, we have the information of the patient, the name, the identifier, everything was transformed to the FHIR resource. And with regard to this entire transformation, various elements were generated. And finally, we generated the actual certificate. Let me show you which are the steps that the internal system does. I have this information right here, and I ask you to please take a good look at it. It's here on the screen. We send an entry bundle with a questionnaire. That questionnaire, internally, the service gets it, it transforms it into a logical structure to be able to accentuate the transformation. So we have data of the patient, data for the certificate, as well as vaccination data. And this becomes a JSON simple under this structure. Later on, what we do is we transform all these elements that you see here on the left now, we transform them into resources. So we'll have information, data, patient data will appear here as patient. That has to do with vaccination and the immunization recommendations, FHIR resources. Immunization, who's the one who signed this document, is part of what we call organization. And all data having to do with the generation of any firm document will part of a document. All of this will be generated in the FHIR server, and later on we will be looking at some of these elements. And after this, once we have kept these elements, we generate a bundle of the document type. And finally, this is what this is the output. We see a document having a certain composition, a document that has data and the links toward the patient, document referencing, and all the elements that we had created earlier. Besides all of this, this document is then signed. The document has a signature by using that private key. The private key will make it for us to be able to validate and verify that the information is indeed the same, and the value, the validity of it, and that there was no transformation at any step. This storage procedure, and as we showed this during the presentation, you see it here, and then we generate the actual registration transaction. That takes a link to the document that you see right here, and it adds it to registry so that then it can be used, associating all the vaccination events under the same code, maintaining them on a list to be able to be retrieved and give support to another operation. Therefore, we look at all of this, but the procedure behind it includes several elements. even some elements for the actual generation of a QR code. Well, part of this and the entire process that we're looking at, what it gives us back is a QR code. How do you generate this QR code? Well, it takes a JSON document. This is core data set, a simplified or logical element. It converts it into an object or CBGR to increase the transmission speed, and that signing element is then compressed and it becomes part of a QR code. As you can see right here, this is a QR that has the data of the core data set as well as a signature, which is part of the data. If I take this QR to a similar QR, and I have an example here for you to see and look at the actual structure this has.
Así es.
So with this tool, I'm going to upload a QR code that I have generated, as you see on the right. And you'll be able to look at the structure that we now have. This is the structure, and internally it has the core data set, a signature, and several other elements that will enable us to validate the signature. Here's all the information we send, which is part of that QR. This structure follows the same procedure of the UECC so what changes here is the internal structure that generates a fire resource with a logical structure which changes, but the other process continues to be exactly one and the same. The care certificate acronym. So let me go back to the post and see what we can do. So where is all this information and where is the QR? It is part of the message now, of the message that has been generated. I'll show you where it is. We have a whole listing of resources, the composition, then we have the patient, plus the immunization right here, and the document reference. Here in document reference, our generation of the QR ES74. This is a ES74, the core data set. And if you bring it to a B74 transformer, it will give you exactly the same result. You also have the image. The image is represented QRC based on the 74. This code is transformed into a file. And then we have the other piece of information that we have, which is exactly the same QR code, but now it is under a PDF. It's a PDF representation. If you need to print or to add anything, you can use any of these mechanisms right here. What is interesting in this case is that besides that QR code may have been signed, there's other types of signatures as well. The other type of signature is the complete document with the entire information that you see right here that then might be signed. So this document reference and its organization, the full document that is, plus the recommendations for vaccines containing a signature also. Once we have installed this signature, then if at a certain moment I modify the data and want to validate it within a process later on, it will not match with the hatch generated by this document, and the document will not work. Let me go to another aspect of the presentation so as not to get lost in the explanation. Therefore, we have the QR code. We now have, of course, our DDCC for the document with all the information, recalling that the use of this project, by the way, is always quite broad. Therefore, the use that might be given to these documents will have to be defined in each case. The next operation has to do with obtaining that health folder. It is turned to transaction. All the vaccination status of a given patient will use the master identifier for vaccination of the patient, HCID. HCID, which is entered the response questionnaire when generating a certificate, and we'll be getting this health folder. Here we have the health folder right here. You can see it for this particular identifier. Looking at the actual generation of the certificate, you can look at the code right here. This is the actual certificate with which we have obtained the code, and that is the code which is being used in order to obtain the health care folder, which is associated to any given patient. If I take this code, then this will show me several things, amongst them the actual reference document that includes the reference to that document. With the same bundle and this mechanism, we would be able to retrieve this bundle should it be necessary to do so. And therefore, we have this possibility of having a bundle type resource in the search, and it has elements of the list type. The following step consists in obtaining the actual certificate. So we go back and we use this reference. In this case, it's reference number 9. Number 9. I will be using this operation in order to obtain the certificate, changing the reference document to number 9. And we will be retrieving thus the certificate. What will the server respond in this case? It will tell us that there's a bundle of the type of document concerned with the HCID that has been generated, and with all the information that we saw earlier. And I will touch right here, and here you have the information again. With this mechanism now, we have storage with the registration. We conduct a search on the registry, and finally, thus, we're able to obtain the document itself. Let me insist that whatever operations you may conduct are extended here, and you may take a QR, obtain the HCID, and go and find it in this service, obtain the data, and be able to conduct comparisons, verifying the validity of this information and its comprehensiveness. Okay, the next step with regard to obtaining this information is the validation of the signature validation. We generate an operation which is a sign validation, which is the opposite signature process. It is not a matter of signing the QR, but rather the signing of the document in itself, the entire document. What is the signature process? The one that allows us to find all the data. We remove certain metadata elements, and the entire information is transferred. We calculate the hatch. That hatch is signed, and this is added to the document that we have. The validation process is the opposite. We take that hatch, once it has been signed with that signature data, we carry out the opposite procedure with the public key, and we also calculate once again the hatch. And if these two values do coincide, it means that the document is valid and that it does contain the information that was previously signed. This doesn't mean necessarily that the data was not modified along the way. So here we leave an operation for this same project to conduct the validation, and we will put it to the test immediately. So what is it that we're proving? I will take this same bundle once again. The bundle contains the signature as well as all the other elements, and I will move to an operation called validate the document, or document validation. This operation, document validation, is right here. So we send the bundle, and we send this document to then be validated. The document gives us a parameter that tells us that the result is good, and therefore this document is valid. If in any instance you detect a document which may have been modified in one way or the other, I will identify one of the letters in this document. I'll remove one letter, and then the hatch would not match anymore. So if I send it once again for validation, the service will tell me that this document is false. It doesn't have the same hatch sign, and it is considered as being invalid. And this way I can change the date, the type of vaccination, and so on and so forth. Any way in which I change the document may be found. I added the value once again, and I would like to make this document valid once again.
Therefore, what we did here was to review the whole operation. We have validate here, obtain certificate, the health folder, and with the example of the generation of the QR code. So if you're going to go digging in that, you will find the same library. All this information is described in the implementation guide. This project that we are sharing with you is not in that implementation guide, but it is an interpretation of the implementation guide. You will find the detail of the transactions, the workflows, the dictionary of data, the CDMD, and some other things like the transaction definitions, which implement the code that I just showed you. And also, if someone in your team wants to re-implement this, you will find something similar interpreting the same elements. And we also have some security download. All of that is found in the implementation guide. So please always take a look at technical guides, and you will always reach a similar solution. Sonia, can you tell me if there are questions? No, there are no questions. Okay. So the code for you to be able to download it is found on this link. So once you have this presentation, you will be able to then to follow this and do it yourself. Thank you very much, Alejandro. These sessions are being recorded. This is the last session we'll have regarding the use case for DDCC. So we will upload it.
Esta semana, más tardar la próxima semana, tener todo.
So hopefully next week at the latest, we will have all the elements there on the site where you will be able to download them. And once they have been uploaded, we will let you know. So thank you so much, Alejandro. And if there are no questions, then we can finish our session. I hope this series of presentations have been useful to you. All the presentations we've been giving you regarding the use and knowledge of DDCC. If you have any doubt or question, so please feel free to let us know, right? And we will help you as you know. And so thank you very much for being here. Thank you all.